Hi, I'm Michael Hoover. I am the owner of the company Art and Stone, and I started collecting stone back when I was probably about 13, 14 is when I started collecting. I actually first got into it when a neighbor called Mr. Stamfeld would let us, my brother and I, go over to his house and use his stone cutting equipment, and then he would take us out on rock hounding trips with the group that he was associated with. So I've been doing this for well over 50 years. I retired really close to 13 years of being retired, and I've been working full-time, basically working with making scales for knives, stone scales for knives. This is my big saw. This is the 24-inch. Basically, if I can lift it, I can cut it. This is a piece of labradorite. I don't know if you can see a little bit of color showing as I play it right in this area above my thumb and in it. This is 1/3 of the piece of labradorite that I last cut in this saw. Now this is the saw I work on the most, and right now I am cutting a piece of extremely good labradorite. It's just a beautiful peacock blue in it, and it has just incredible bands. This saw is going to be set up. There's a little chain here. You really can't see it in here, but there is a chain. I can show it. I pull it. The carriage slides. It has a chain on it that once I turn it on, it'll turn itself off automatically. So what I'm doing is setting this up for cutting the next piece of labradorite, hopefully to get 2 slabs so I have one, enough for one knife. I now have to lock the carriage, which is now locked. That's the carriage lock. Go to the machine. Flip the switch and we're off and running. First step after I cut the stones on the saws down there is I use almost all stone I treat with Hicksville. I kind of look at it as an insurance policy. First of all, it gives me a kind of a shiny surface so I can see what the stone's going to look like on a knife. And it also allows me to take and mark patterns on the knives, and if I change my mind, I can erase them with goof off. So that way I can lay them out without having to worry about staining the stone. I do that so that I have a way of making sure that little pits and vugs are filled, that pits, lines, vugs are kind of like the same thing as grain checks and knots in stone. So it's kind of the same kind of thing. I seal them. Hicksville, when it gets hot, it gets more liquid at first, and it'll wick down into the actual little tiny pits and tracks that are in the stone that cause all these colors to show all the way through. So it'll get into almost anything that can possibly be a problem, like a crack in a windshield, how they take and they punch the little hole and they fix it and it doesn't break. Same thing with stone. Now I always wear magnification in almost everything I do, mostly because I'm obsessive compulsive and everything has to be as perfect as I can possibly make it. That's just, I don't know, it's something that's part of me. I got about 1 inch left to cut, and it's about a total of 12 inches around to cut out one set of scales. And that's assuming you don't have to go in from a side or anything else. That's just the actual cutting out of the scale. Dinosaur bone is not even close to as hard as some of the stones I work with. But you can see the little bumps and stuff. We're going to go down to a grinder and take those off. And you always try to work only on the outside edge of the wheels, because the middle, no matter how much you work on the edge, gets worn faster. Because you work a lot of times across. The other thing about doing this is I'm using about 20 pounds of force on this little tiny bit of stone. So if there's any flaws in it that Hicksville didn't fix, this is a good place it'll break. I'd rather it break here than when it's on the knife that's being sold to somebody. And then to make sure it's still flat, because when you're pushing different angles, you can get you get a little wobble in it, and it'll have a wave that I don't want. Again, I like to have my stone fit so tight that you can't see a seam. That's my goal. The scale won't fit dead flat on that spine. If you look at knives I've done, You can't even see it's like the stone becomes the metal. That's my goal. Sometimes the quality is really, really good and you get a batch that's really, really good. Other times there's issues with the knives that come from Buck, straight from the factory. You notice the blade is almost touching this side over here. It has a very badly centered blade. So one of the first things I always do is one of the very first things I check is that. And this one has a secondary problem in that it has a really pathetic snap. Whatever side the blade is closest to is the side you whack. And you can tell I do this a lot because that is my hold right there. And I sit there. This is a leather hammer so it doesn't mar anything. And it should improve there's my stamps already. Look at my stamps already. Look how much better that is. Just cleaning that out. And oh, slightly too much one way. Give one more whack. I don't even would have needed one light whack. And hopefully that will take it. Yep, now we're centered. And this is how I take that and clean up that little bit up here on the top of the false knife edge. This is a Scotch-Brite wheel. It's actually a pretty aggressive wheel. It'll even cut stainless steel, so if I leave a little mark on something that I have to take off, I'll usually go to here, then I'll go buff it out. This is so dangerous in this shop. I've had so many cuts. It's just, I've done over 3,200 knives, and I've probably had 3,200 cuts. So we got to remove all the pins, because to take the scales off, I got to have the pins off for the most part. I would normally do all of them, but this takes a lot, and I normally wear a N95 mask when I'm doing this because it does create a lot of dust. Okay. There's the parts. Next thing we do is I pull out all the pins, factory pins. Doesn't take long, but then I'll show you how dirty the knife is and why why I do all this. Show how much junk is inside these things. This is all gunk. I mean, it's sticky. I don't know how, I guess maybe it'll lubricate to some extent because it kind of has a wax base to it, but you can see how much stuff we've already taken out. Still not done. We're just getting the worst of it off. This is the rocker arm, which has to move up and down. And look at the crud coming off of that sucker. I'm going to set up this. Inside of the holes on the scales are already formed with a little bit of a bevel in them, and I'm beveling the outside ones. Now use a dental adhesive or a dental glue that is rather interesting. It's a UV, it's blue light. I fill up a hole, there's a little bubble above, and I quickly treat it, and believe it or not, that one's done. That one's hard. I'm going to go here and take all these casting marks off and polish this so that it'll have a much better finish when I'm done with the knife. I'm going to go over and hit the polishing wheel. I have a rounded wheel that I use that's almost this shape to polish it. KNG green, it's pretty good polish for just about everything. It's just like a mirror polish all the way across now. All that factory, all the factory casting lines are now gone. We're now going to be putting the knife back together. Start by putting in this is actually the part that causes the spring. Then we put back the rocker arm, get it pretty close to centered. And then we put it in the vise. Trying to get the hole pretty close to center. The two scales that you took off work just fine for the correct space to push it all back together. And I use a little pin here to get this pin to be able to drop back in. Sometimes it needs a little help. Believe it or not, the knife is back together. Next step is to cut this off. Now, actually cutting it off isn't as easy as it seems because you got to be dead straight, otherwise you're going to nick the top or you're going to nick something to it. Lots of experience. After we get the blade cut close to finished done, you got to expand it a little bit. It's called peening. This is another learned skill, so you don't beat the heck out of your liners. You have to learn to hammer them pretty much dead flat. And I can usually tell how close I am with a file. Pretty good all the way across. Good. I'm not hearing any thunks or feeling anything. The next step is cleaning up the actual face right in here. This face tends to have lines and other rough spots in it that are just factory. And there's also that rolled edge. Again, you can't see it, but the little edge is rolled here to somewhat. So back to file work. I've actually got little tiny spots that help hold the knife flat and straight. I can actually hear it, and you can see it taking off a little lip where it rolled over from the top, if you can see that little shiny spot right there. The stone, I try to get it fit so tight that if that little stucker sticks out, it'll snag on it. And also, again, when I fit this side in first and I get the front to drop in, and if it's the same issue, if it's hanging out, I got problems. I've marked this with an aluminum pencil. Just like that. So I can tell, and I always hold the knife, and always on a buck 110, the curve is in towards the center, and you work it in a figure 8. So that your hand, and I'm using about 30 pounds of down pressure. Again, I'd rather it break here than on the knife after the knife's done. You can see that the fit line is absolutely dead tight, top and bottom. Okay, the next step to get it prepped is I use a sanding wheel. Make sure it's super clean. The Loctite 325 is what I use with, this is the activator for it. It's an anaerobic glue, which has about 2,000 pounds per square inch grabbing strength when it's fully cured. And to finish up the area that I can't reach with that, I use my rough edge on a wheel on this. You spray the stone with the adhesive, you let it sit for about 3 minutes. And during that 3 minutes, you're spreading the Loctite 325 onto the scale. And then I spread the adhesive very carefully to not get any bubbles in it. You want to avoid making bubbles because if you have a bubble, you have a little hole there. Once I do that, these are high pressure clamps, I grab while the glue's on it and I twist like a little bit like this, because these scales tend to only go out in one direction. So if you twist that way and this way, in that first 26 seconds, you get a really tight squish on the twisting to match up the lines tight here and here, and basically a zero line there and a zero line there. There's a glue line right here and here that I usually have to make sure I didn't get any on the inside. I try to clean up the inside really quick while it's still wet. This is the next step, getting it clean to make sure the knife will snap closed perfectly. This is where we're grinding. This is what I tried to do, a rough grind. You can see where there's a little hickstall still showing here in the middle, right here. That will come off on the next couple steps, but I want to go down to throw a towel on and grind this part off here so you get a better feel for how I shape the stone and get it as close as I can, because you can see I haven't cut in the middle here yet either, to get it down to where it's close to the metal to come over to the next set of wheels where I start sanding it rather than grinding it. Grinding it is really tricky. You don't want to get it too far down because grinders can leave deep random scratches. So I try to do most of, once I get it close, on what are called soft wheels. I have a 60, 120, and then I also have a wheel that is a silicon carbide wheel. It's a 220 grit that sands metal. Metal sands faster than stone, so I kind of bounce back and forth between them to get me the smoothest flow to a center. Nice ramps is what I call them, from the metal into the stone. Okay, I'm now going to start up the grinder, and we're going to go ahead and take and work this to where it would be ready to go onto the other machine. I can actually feel it when the wheel starts hitting the metal. It has a different feel to it. So I get really close. Okay, once we finish that, we're switching over to this is a metal wheel. It tends to cut metal really fast as compared to the other. These are diamond wheels. So I tend to switch back and forth between them. If you can, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little bit of Hickstal still showing here because it's a high spot that I have to get domed, and you can see there's aluminum markings around it to make it show a little easier. So anyway, I'm going to start that. We'll go there, and then we'll go to the next steps. I'm starting on a 60 grit wheel. We got that section done. The other thing we're going to be doing is right here, it still has to take I have to remove the metal to get it to blend into the ramp up on this one. So I'll be switching over to this wheel and this wheel back and forth as I need to cut metal or stone. Metal cuts faster on silicone carbide. Stone cuts a lot faster on diamond. The back side is already done, and now I've got to go to the metal to get the front side to ramp up into the stone to match the back one. That'll be done on this wheel. Again, it's more of a touch and watch thing to make sure that you've got even on crosses are cut. You cannot see any one of these seams now. You can't visually see any distance between the stone and the metal. This is called a deburring tool, and I run it down and take a little burr. You can actually see them when I get done. I take usually a couple passes just to take it rounds the edge, because I remember you've sanded that flat with the wheels, especially the metal wheel. So I'm giving it a little bit of a rounded edge so that it blends in a little better and it doesn't hit the ricasso. Granted, this was a short version. Normally it takes an hour to 2 hours to do all this staging here, but I only done one part here and then did the spine with most everything else already done. Otherwise you'd be watching a video for 8 hours, because that's how 8 to 10 hours, because that's how long it takes to do one of these. The bolster, everything just works perfectly smooth into like one piece. So I number them and send a card, but I do not ever mark a blade. It's just kind of one of my little quirks. I think my work should stand on its own just by how it looks. So that's why I don't mark my blades. Okay, what I'm doing now is this is the very same knife I just finished up over there. The next step it goes to is a 300 grit. And I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of it. And I'm going to do the same thing on each wheel, each grit, to explain what I'm doing. What we're doing here is taking out the 120 grit marks and any marks left by the 220 grit silicon carbide. And it's pretty amazing. I think we'll be able to see some of it. I have a good wheel that's fairly new and one that's pretty worn out on these two grits, because I have to bounce back and forth off between them. I can actually look with my magnification and see a lot of marks from whatever wheel that was on the prior one. So the object is to get all this nice and smooth. Now I was going this way. Then you got to go this way to see if you have any residual markings. I can actually sand to an exact spot on the knife just from feel. I know if I see a scratch, there's a couple right down here. It's right there on the wheel. And guess what? They're all gone. Now the only spot I finished is this one, so I'm just gonna do the rough and final on it and show how it looks. Because the marks are all going this way right now on this end. I turn the water off. And as it gets dry, you see not to ever use these wheels dry. Oh, I've been doing it enough times I can tell. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but I can see a shine all the way down there. And if there were any scratches, those random deep scratches all the way back to the 120 or the silicon carbide, I'd be able to see them. But there's none. And none. I see some marks down in here on the bottom. So that's the hard trend. No, it's actually, the transition from stone to metal is always really difficult. This is what I consider the sanding stage over here. We're going to switch over to the polishing stage now. Different machine. It's the first polishing wheel. And again, we ended running the marks this direction. They're going back. The next step is getting the spine. The spine is two different metals. It's steel and silver nickel. Well, silver nickel is a lot softer than the steel. So, you have to be, I do the basic first metal polish after doing this stage, this 1000 grit. Now, you can't even see it, I know, but I can see that this back of this blade, after I took that little lip off, it's now a little higher than the bolt, than the liners against the stone from the center point back. And so what we're going to do here is tuck it down to make sure I don't have any marks, because when you polish it, it won't show. It's up so fractional of an inch, it just makes it actually a better way to make sure you have enough room to open and close it. And I'm going to polish the spine because that's the next step. This is where we're going to go and take off and polish all the way from the blade to the whole rock arm and the back of the blade that's going to show. So I start with this wheel over here, which I use. This is called K&N Green. It's a wonderful, wonderful polish that takes out most scratches and leaves a wonderful shine. And then I'll be following it up with, I call, this is pink, no scratch. That's on this wheel. So it may get a little dusty at this stage because I'm going to charge this wheel, and that one gets pretty dusty. I do it first, just in case. Green's not a, it's more wax in it. It just, I tend to use the edge to try to not do too much on the stone if I don't have to. Because sometimes it'll dull the stone, or it's black, so there's a little tiny flaw or pit. towel. That is a really, really good edge. I mean, we got it's like a miracle, start to finish. That looks like haze. Yep, that's a little bit of haze there. It's like a miracle from one end to the other. That's the goal. Okay, this is a 3000 grit. I use very little water on it because I want it to leave the kind of polish I want. And then, remember I talked about I'm really good? I can actually polish all the way almost to the metal. Just by knowing where to stop on the edges. And again, we got just an absolute beautiful polish. We're almost using no pressure. And we got a pretty darn good polish on this one, even though I still would spend more time because there's I see some alligator, but it's already got a pretty good polish. Okay, now we switch over to the pet polishing. Now this knife has been already polished through this grit, and we're going to go to the 8000 grit, which is a lot of stone you go to 8000 and end at 14,000. Dinosaur bone prefers stopping at 8000 and then go to a dry polish, which I'll explain. It's using Fabuluster and Zam, and Dinosaur bone takes a better polish on that. Again, this is a speed issue. And now we got just a beautiful, beautiful flat polish from end to end. On Dinosaur bone and a lot of other stones, for some reason, they take a better polish with a dry polish. And this is fabulous. There's a real fine grit in it, and even lighter pressure on this end. You almost dust on it. It just takes off some sort of. It's almost like a haze that'll take off. It's hard to explain. Final step is polishing the metal. The last little thing I do, sometimes right along this very edge, it creates a little bit of depression, doesn't take as good a polish, so I generally do a polish with light pink. It's just got an absolutely marvelous glow to it now. So I start back up here, it's pretty dirty, so I start here, which also polishes the front of the bolster. Then, scary part, this little tiny part of the knife right there that gets hidden. Yeah, I've had some scary things occur doing this part of the knives, working the blade. Okay, now we're going to do this flat. Down the center of the blade. Okay, first we're going to do is take off the masking tape from the polishing, and that does tend to leave a little deposit right along here. So I have this towel over here that in my hands now is for when I'm working with metal polish. Blue Magic, hey, I was right, it is Blue Magic, couldn't remember the brand name. And I push up into the stone so I don't leave new scratches on the metal, because I want to keep it as mirror polish, and this pushing onto the stone doesn't seem to ever hurt anything. So I do that first. Just a quick sweep inside. Oh, Oh, look how much came out of that. Okay, now we're going to go with the Blue Magic first. This is just a final cleanup to get all the gunk off of basically the whole knife. I look for anything that's black up here, and that false knife edge tends to pick up stuff. Black already. In here, as best I can off the tip, back off the edge. And then we'll still have that kind of gooey and yuck and clean. I polish even the inside just to clean it more than anything. Bad thing is you have to have a clean spot on the towel. Make sure it's clean and there's nothing going on with it, because you also notice I'm going lengthwise only. Nothing more irritating than getting it all the way done and find out, oops, I missed that. Then we just switch over, different towel even. 2 towels actually, I'm gonna, because I do my final wipe down with one that's brand new, or close to new. And this is a Renaissance wax. It's really good stuff. I highly recommend it for, I've used a lot of different waxes, and this is the one I'm stuck on, and I really like the way it cleans up everything. Again, pretty darn dirty, and that's the second. I didn't even go over the blade. I just did over mostly the stone. That's all the stuff I picked up off the stone. That's off the inside. And once more over the blade with another clean spot, so we pick up off of that. And then I polished the last final polish with basically a clean one. Again, rubbing the same direction. Now you have to fold the blade a little bit to get that little spot right there. Look at the beauty of that. I mean, it's just glowing. Seams that are so tight you literally can't see them. It goes straight from metal to stone. That's my goal.